Okay, Parsha Illuminated for Parsha Shoftim. So Parsha Shoftim talks about Shoftim, judges, in addition to many other things. But we're going to start at the beginning of the Parsha, and we'll move from judges to kings. Um, and that's about as far as we're going to get, I think. So the Parsha begins in the middle of chapter 16, Parak Tezayin, and it says, Shoftim v'shotrim titen lecha b'chol sha'arecha. You should appoint judges and enforcers in your gates that God gives you, and they should judge the nation mishpat tzedek. They should judge them righteously. Then it goes on, they shouldn't pervert justice, they shouldn't show favoritism, they shouldn't take a bribe, and they should pursue justice. I saw that Rav Moshe Sternbuch points out that part of the lesson here is that judges should treat every case the same, no matter who the litigants are. A judge might say, well, these litigants don't really have much knowledge of halacha, of Jewish law anyways, so I could kind of just say whatever I want and they won't know the difference. We could just make compromise is good, but sometimes it's not the right option. So I'll just make a compromise for them, and really, um, he should be treating it the same way he treats it as if he had the most knowledgeable people sitting in front of him who would be able to ask all the right questions, and and he should treat everyone equally in how he judges. Then we go on and we seem to shift completely all of a sudden to various other topics. The Torah goes on in verse 21, Pasuk Chaf Aleph, Lo sita lecha asherah kol eitz eitz mizbach Hashem Elokecha asher ta'asa lach. You should not plant yourself an asherah, which is a type of tree, or any other tree, near the altar of Hashem, which is understood, at least by Rashi, to mean you're not allowed to plant trees on the Temple Mount, on Har Habayis. We don't plant trees around the Beis Hamikdash. This is a practice of idolatrous nations to plant trees around their altars, and so therefore we are to stay away from that. And then it says, and don't erect a monument which the Lord your God hates. This is referring to an altar that's made of one stone. Just you have one big stone, and you put your wood and your fire on top of that, and that's where you put your sacrifices. Don't make a mizbeach, don't make an altar that's just a matzeva, that's just one big stone. Rather, we're to build our mizbechos, our altars, as many stones together. And again, this is, as Rashi discusses, an issue of doing what the other nations do, in this case, the Canaanite nations. The Rashi says it's now hated by God. Previously, it had not been. This is actually how the forefathers would make altars commonly. They would just use one big stone as their altar. But even though it was beloved in the days of the forefathers, but once they entered the land of Canaan, and this was how the idolaters made their altars, so made their mizbechos, so then it becomes hated in the eyes of God. This is how you make an altar for idols, and therefore we're not to make an altar in that fashion. And then one more verse, it says, Lo sizbach Hashem Elokecha shor v'asasher yebomim. Don't offer as an offering a ox or a sheep that has a mum, that has a blemish, because that is abominable before God. And so we have the prohibition of bringing karbanos, bringing offerings that have blemishes. So we seem to have a complete detour here. We begin by speaking about appointing shoftim, appointing judges, and then we shift into various laws relating to the mizbeach, relating to the altar. And that is, first, don't plant trees near it, don't make a matzeva, don't make a one-stoned altar, and don't bring animals that are blemished. Notably, though, this isn't the only time that we find discussions about judgment or mishpat, justice, right around a discussion about a mizbeach. Actually, if we go back to the very end of Parshas Yisro, so at the very end of Parshas Yisro, we have commandments regarding how to build a mizbeach. The very last few verses, my bar mitzvah parsha, Parshas Yisro. They read, Mizbach adama tasali. You should make a mizbeach of earth, meaning attached to the ground. And that's where you should bring your offerings. And then if you make it out of stones, it says, don't hew it using metal. Don't hew the stones with metal tools. And then it says, and you should not make steps going up to the Mizbeach, rather you should have a ramp. And that's the end of Parshas Yisro. And then, what follows Yisro? Mishpatim. Ve'ela ha-mishpatim asher tasim lifneim. These are the mishpatim, these are the laws that you should place before them. So we have juxtaposed the mention of the Mizbeach right there with the laws of, with the law and justice. And there seems to be a pattern here. And there seems to be a connection between these two concepts. Rashi, already over there in Parshas Mishpatim, I think. Yeah, Rashi asked this question. Lama nismecha parshas dinin la parshas mizbeach. Why is the idea of dinin, of laws, of justice, mentioned next to the mizbeach? Lomar lecha, it's to tell you shetasim sanhedrin eitzel hamikdash, that the sanhedrin should be next to the mikdash, next to the base of mikdash, next to the temple, next to the altar. So the sanhedrin, the high court, is to be near the mizbeach. That's why they're positioned next to each other. The discussion of the laws of law and justice, and the discussion of Mizbeach, because law and justice, the Sanhedrin should be near the Mizbeach. But I don't know if that really answers our question. That just perhaps furthers the question along. Why? Why should the Sanhedrin be near the Mizbeach? What does one have to do with the other? In our Parsha, there's a very fascinating midrash, and I put it on the source sheet, and the midrash discusses Shoftim v'Shotrim. You should appoint judges and officers. It says, Amar Rav Acha. Rav Acha said, come and see, bo re'eh, sheish malos haya lakisei shel Shlomo. Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, had 6 steps leading up to his throne. How do we know that? It's a verse in Malachim. It says there were 6 stairs to the throne. Okay, that's how we know. Now the midrash goes on, and it says that in this parsha, our parsha, back to our parsha Shoftim, we have 6 things, 6 negative commandments that we just read off, and it lists them from our parsha. It's the same verse in the top box. Lo satem mishpat, right? Do not distort judgment. Lo sakir panim, don't show favoritism. Lo sikach shochad, don't take a bribe. That's 3. And then it says, don't plant an Asherah tree next to the Mizbeach. That's 4. And it says, don't make a matzeva, don't make a monument, a one-stoned altar. That's 5. And don't sacrifice animals that have a mum, that have a blemish. That's 6. There are 6 negative prohibitions mentioned right after the commandment to establish Shoftim, 6 negative commandments, and says the Medrash that the herald, the announcer would stand in front of the throne of King Solomon, and when Shlomo would step up onto the first step, he would read the first of those 6 verses, and King Shlomo would step onto the second step, he would read the second one, and so on, and he would read him these 6 verses as Shlomo mounted upon his throne, seemingly to judge, to judge cases. Shlomo famously wisest of all men, and to judge in his own right. So they would read these 6 verses as he mounted the throne. I think there's another midrash that says a little differently, that says that actually these verses were carved into the steps of the throne. But either way, it's really strange, because I understand that the first 3 make sense. As the judge gets up to judge, we remind him, don't pervert justice, don't show favoritism, don't take bribes. That makes sense. But the other 3 don't make any sense. As Shlomo mounts his throne to judge, we tell him, don't plant an Asherah tree next to the Mizbeach. Don't make a Mizbeach that's one stone, that's one monument. And don't bring animals that have blemishes. Very difficult to understand why we would be reading these verses as a judge goes up to judge. And this is the question that is discussed in our Parsha by the Kli Yakar. And actually, he discusses it here. He discusses it also in the beginning of Mishpatim at length. And the Kli Yakar suggests that it's not coincidence that in our Parsha these things are placed together. And as I mentioned also in Parshas Mishpatim, it's pretty clear that the Torah is trying to draw a connection between these laws relating to the Mizbeach, to the altar, and the position of a judge. And therefore, it's then upon us to figure out what the connection is. What is it that we're supposed to learn from the juxtaposition, from the arrangement of these 2 ideas right next to each other? But there's some relevance for the judge. He's got to know, as he gets onto his throne of judgment, in case of the king, or a judge in the court. These are things that he is supposed to also keep in mind. And the only question still remains is why? What is the significance of each of these things? So actually working backwards, if we start with the last one, so it says, don't bring an offering that has a mum, that has a blemish. It's talking about an external blemish. So it's interesting, because actually the Gemara tells us that a member of the Sanhedrin is also not allowed to have a blemish. So a physical blemish. Exactly what's defined as that is a discussion, but a member of the Sanhedrin also can't have an external blemish. The Gemara doesn't bring a source for it, though. Says the Kli Yakar, this is the source. This is the source, because why is the Torah telling you right next to the laws of judges that a animal can't have a blemish when you bring it as an offering? It's to tell you that there's something to derive from there to judges. Now, why is it that a judge is not allowed to have an external blemish? So I think there are different ideas that could be said. I'll just tell you what the Kli Yakar says, and maybe won't fit into all our modern sensitivities, but this is what he says. He says that, I think if we consider and we think about it, then we can understand it, that an external physical blemish is a message to that person that there's something internally that they need to improve in. Now, it's not to say that somebody who doesn't have an external blemish doesn't have anything to improve in, but this is just one way that I guess that God gives that message to a person. And so the judge, Shlomo, as he mounts his throne, is to be reminded of this idea. Shlomo, as he mounts his throne, any judge, as he takes up his position of authority, really, and as a decision maker within our society, so he has to remember that a judge can't have an external blemish, and the real reason for that is because that would be an indication of some kind of internal blemish. And therefore, the judge has to be thinking, has to be considering whether he has his own internal blemishes, his own internal areas that he needs to resolve, improve in order to judge fairly, in order to judge justly. And so that's the first message. First, this is, I guess, on the last step, because it's the last of the 6 verses, the last of the 6 prohibitions. But this is one message for the judge, is to remember that judge cannot have an external blemish, and that's really a message that he can't have an internal blemish, and he has to do a little bit of contemplation and try to uproot any internal blemishes that he has. Now, next, again, working backwards, it says, don't erect a matzeva, an altar that's made of one stone. Why are we telling the judge this? So, says the Kliyakar that what we're saying is that just like an altar shouldn't be of one stone, so too, the Sanhedrin can't be just of one stone. It can't just be one person. It has to be, it's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, Ein dan yechidi ala echad. There's only one who judges alone, and that's God. And therefore, the Sanhedrin had to be made up of many people, 70 typically. Different courts are different numbers for different things, 3, 23, 70. But the message of that you can't make an altar that's only one stone, you should make an altar of many stones, is also a message for the Sanhedrin, for the High Court, that you can't just be one person, you have to be many people. And interestingly, the Kliyakar says that we know, like we mentioned before, that in earlier times, in the times of the forefathers, it was okay to have a mizbeach, to have an altar that was one stone. It was only later that when they entered the land of Israel that changed, that it was no longer acceptable to have an altar made of one stone. And says the Kliyakar, so too, in earlier times, it was okay to have a judge alone. He says the forefathers judged alone. Yehuda had a court. We know that Tamar is comes before the court of Yehuda to be judged. Yehuda was judging alone. Moshe Rabbeinu judged alone until his father-in-law came and convinced him to appoint more judges. And that was when people were on a higher level. But then later, that just like what kind of mizbeach were to use changed, so too the idea of having somebody judge alone also changed. This is what the Kliyakar says. Now, what he seems to not address, though, is that we do find that kings continued to judge alone, including Shlomo, and we're talking about Shlomo's throne. So I'm not sure how he resolves that, because the message is important for the Sanhedrin, but there was power given to a king to judge alone for many things, at least things relating to the kingship, and so this message doesn't seem to resonate for King Shlomo as he's mounting his throne. But that will have to leave as a question unless somebody has an answer for that. And then the last thing, again, there were three things here that made sense to be telling a judge: don't pervert justice, don't show favoritism, don't take a bribe. 3 things, though, that seemingly are unrelated to judging. And the third was, don't plant an asherah next to the mizbech, next to the altar. Don't plant a tree next to the altar. And why would we be telling a judge this message? Why would they be announcing this to Shlomo HaMelech, to King Solomon, as he climbs onto his throne? It seems completely unrelated. So here the Kliyakar suggests that actually there's a statement in the Gemara. The Gemara says that anybody who appoints a judge who's not fit for the job, it's as if he planted an Asherah tree. Again, an Asherah tree typically is a tree that is worshipped as avodah zarah, as some form of idolatry. In this case, we're not only saying don't plant an idolatry tree. That's actually obvious, but also don't plant any tree near the Mizbeach, near the altar. But the Kuyakar suggests that the message of not planting a tree next to the Mizbeach, what's the message for the judge, is that you shouldn't be like this Asherah tree. An Asherah tree stands erect and tall, and that implies a certain amount of arrogance. And that's what we are telling the judge. Don't plant yourself like an Asherah tree. Don't be like this. Don't act this way, and don't become a judge for this reason. Just out of, for the honor to be that tall tree that people look up to, and besides for that on its own, we despise, God despises arrogance. But as a judge, person isn't going to judge properly if they're arrogant. First of all, they won't be willing to ask questions. If there's something that they don't know, then they'll be too arrogant to inquire and to say, I'm not sure, I have to look into this, I have to ask questions, and that will lead to perverted justice. And he relates the word Asherah to the word Asher. Asher means, or Osher with an aleph. With an ayin, Osher means wealth and richness. Osher with an aleph means also a related word like happiness and fortune, and like Ashrei Yoshvei Beisecha is fortunate. It's sometimes translated as praiseworthy, but fortunate are those who dwell in your house. And he says that the message is that don't appoint judges for Osher, just for fortune, for honor, and this is both on the judge themselves and those who appoint him. Those who appoint the judge may be doing it as hoping either it's a family member that they're hoping will be honored, or it's someone that they think will judge them in a good light, and they're hoping, just like the Asherah tree gives off its shade, that they can protect themselves under the shade of this judge, and the Torah warns us that we should not appoint judges like an Asherah tree, those who will be arrogant, those who do it for honor, and those who will just give their shade to those people that they like. And actually, the Kuyakar concludes, and he says, in our generation, he's writing this in, I think, the 1600s, he says, there's numerous of these Asherah trees planted in every city, meaning judges that have been appointed illegitimately in different cities, when there are people more worthy to be appointed. And it seems the Kuyakar here in this explanation was trying to address an issue that was current to his generation. Now, just to note an interesting idea that Rameir Shapiro said regarding this, he said that again, relating the judges here to the Mizbeach, the juxtaposition both here and in Parshas Mishpatim of justice and judges to the concept of the Mizbeach, is to teach us that a judge should be like a Mizbeach, like an altar, that the inside of the altar was filled with dirt, and which teaches that inside a judge has to be humble. On the outside, though, the altar was coated in copper, and so on the outside the judge has to be strong, and not just a judge, but any leader of the Jewish people has to be humble inside, but they have to have the temperament and the tenacity and really the strength on the outside to stand up against the pressures and the difficult people, and so a leader in the Jewish people, a judge or a leader, needs this combination of humility on the inside, the dirt that was on the inside of the Mizbeach, but at the same time the metal, to both pun and no pun intended, the metal on the outside to be able to stand up to the pressures of the position. And just one more idea on this point that Reb Chaim Brisker says is that the Asherah, we're saying don't plant an Asherah next to the Mizbeach. An Asherah generally is a tree that was planted for Avodah Zarah, for idolatry. But Reb Chaim Brisker says you wouldn't be able to tell just by looking at it. It looks like a normal tree, but because it's worshipped as Avodah Zarah, as some form of idolatry, so that disqualifies it. And he says that that's juxtaposed next to the instructions of appointing judges, because again, we have to be careful that the judges that we appoint don't just look like trees on the outside, but on the inside, they're really, either worshiping themselves or some just they don't have tocho kibaro. Their inside is not like their outside, and so again, the judges and the leaders that we appoint in our communities we have to be sure that we find the people who are both inside and outside excellent in their knowledge, but also in their character traits, and they don't it's not just that they just wear the garb on the outside, but on the inside they're rotten, God forbid. Rather, we have to find those who are pure on the inside and on the outside, as opposed to the Asherah tree, which looks nice on the outside because it's a nice tree, but on the inside it's really something that's that's terrible. It's a avodah zarah, it's an idolatry. So our judges can't be like that. So that's a few ideas regarding the connection between the Mizbeach and different laws relating to the Mizbeach, to the altar, and the judges. Again, as the Kliyakar said, that we have the law, the prohibition of bringing offerings that have that have blemishes, and so too we have to be careful not to appoint judges that have external blemishes, but also that have internal blemishes. And a judge, as he walks up to do his duty, has to consider his own internal blemishes and try to rectify them. We're not to build a mizbeach, an altar that's one stone, rather it has to be of many stones. So to the Sanhedrin, the court should be of many stones, not just one judge, but a team of judges judging together. And we're not to plant a tree near the mizbeach, an Asherah, which stands tall and arrogant and gives shade. And so too, our judges shouldn't be appointed out of their own arrogance, out of seeking honor for them, their families, and just for those seeking shade from those judges. Okay, now moving ahead in the Parsha, but really a very related topic. And that is a different type of leader, and that is the topic of appointing kings in the Jewish people. And we're not really going to focus so much or at all on the question of the legitimacy of appointing a king. That's a big question here. Torah says that when you come to the land of Israel, you'll ask for a king, so you should appoint a king. And it's a question of if that's a commandment. Are they supposed to do this? Are they not supposed to do this? If they are supposed to do this, why is it that when they do it, in the book of Shmuel gets so angry at them and God gets angry at them? So that's a whole discussion in its own right. But I want to talk about some of the commandments that are given to the king. And that begins in verse Yudches, verse 18 of chapter 17. And it says there, and it will be when he sits upon his throne, and he should write for himself 2 copies of the Torah. They translate it here, al sefer, on a scroll from the Torah mifnei kohanim haLevim, copied over from the Torah that the Kohanim and the Levim have. So the king is to write 2 sefer Torahs. Every other Man is commanded to write one Torah, but the king is commanded to write an additional Torah. And this additional Torah, it says, Vaisayimo, it should be with him, Vikarabo kol yimei chayav, and he should read it all the days of his life, Leman yomad liyiras Hashem elokav, in order that he may learn to fear the Lord his God, Lishmoris kol divrei Torah azos, to keep all the words of the Torah, Vesachokim ha'elo asosam, and the statutes to perform them. Liviltirum livavo me'achav, in order that his heart will not be haughty over his brothers, and so that he will not turn away from the commandment. So the king is instructed to write a Torah, to bring that Torah with him, and to read from it all the days of his life. Now, this commandment is given to him, the first verse there said, it will be when he sits. In other words, he's to do this right away. And Rav Hirsch explains that it's so essential that he do this because this is going to remind him that this is how he's to guide his kingdom. It's with the laws of this Torah. It's not for him to make up his own Torah, even though he's the king. But there's a higher, he may be the highest amongst the Jewish people, but there's a higher power and a higher law than that which he says, and that which a higher law than that which he dictates. And so he's to write a Torah right away to remind him that this should be his guiding light. These are the principles that should guide him, and this is really his purpose. Maybe the most important message for him is, what is the king's job? What is the job of a Jewish king? The job of the Jewish king is to guide the people and ensure that they keep this Torah. So the very first thing he does is he writes for his own Torah, even an extra Torah, to remind him that this is what's to guide him in his rulership, and it's for this that he rules. It's so that he can guide the people in following the Torah. But it's interesting to note that the Torah says that the reason he should have it is that he should learn to fear God and to keep the Torah. Now, how did he become king in the first place? He became king because God chose him. That's what the pasuk says. It says, "Som tasim alecha melech." You should appoint for yourself a king. Asher yivchar Hashem elokecha, that Hashem chooses for you. So let me just make sure that I'm quoting the verse correctly. Yeah, that's what it says. So the king is who Hashem chooses. Now, who do we think that Hashem is going to choose to be the king? Who's, as like we just said from Rav Hirsch, who is Hashem going to choose to be the king who's to keep the people on the straight path of the Torah and guide them? Well, we would think that it would be somebody who's very righteous and God-fearing and keeps the Torah, right? We don't want to pull a guy off the street and say, you're going to be in charge, write yourself a Torah, and you'll learn how to fear God, and you'll learn the mitzvahs, and then you'll teach them to everybody, and you'll make sure everybody stays on the path. No, we're going to choose someone who's already God-fearing, who's already one of the most righteous of the Jewish people. So what does it mean? It says he should read it, Liman Yilmad, in order that he should learn to fear God. I hope he already learned that before he was chosen by God to be the king. So this is a question raised by Rav Schwab in Mayim Beis HaShoeva. And Rav Schwab says what you see is that, of course, this person that's chosen as king is somebody who's God-fearing and knows the laws of the Torah and keeps them. But as soon as you appoint him as king, as soon as he gets that power, he gets that authority, so what is likely and inevitably to happen is that he grows arrogant. He ram levavo, his heart becomes bloated, and he quickly forgets God. That actually is what happens to a person who is arrogant. Um, they see their successes as their own, and they remove God from the picture. Actually, the Gemara says in Maseches Sota, the Talmud says in Sota, it says that Rav Chisda said that anybody who has arrogance, God says, he and I can't live in the same world. And it quotes a verse to back this up. But what does that mean? God says, he and I can't live in the same world. What it's really saying is that somebody who's arrogant, they've already declared there's no room for God in their life because they're a person. Why is the person arrogant? Because they take credit for all their successes, for all their accomplishments. It was me. Humility means that we recognize and we acknowledge that our successes and our abilities and our talents come from God, and we don't grow arrogant as a result. But sometimes when we are seeing success, then our inclination is to take credit and not give credit to God. And in order to do that, we have to remove God from the picture. So if God's in the picture, then how can I take credit? But we start to forget about God, and so in a certain sense, God says, if he's arrogant, that means he has no room for me in the world. So we can't dwell in the same world. So this is any person who becomes king is at risk of this happening to them. I was appointed because I'm so great, and because of my tremendous abilities and accomplishments and talents and good looks and whatever else goes into it, wealth, and they could easily forget God. So they need to relearn to fear God. They need to relearn Yiras Shamayim, Yiras Hashem Elokov, to fear God and to keep His Torah. And based on this, Rav Schwab makes a very interesting suggestion for a question that's discussed by different commentators. Every month, except for this coming month, before Rosh Chodesh, we bless the new month, Birkas HaChodesh. We don't do it going into Rosh Hashanah, but every other month of the year, before Rosh Chodesh, on Shabbos, we have Shabbos Mivarchim, the Shabbos where we bless the new month. And we have a prayer there. The prayer actually comes from the Gemara. This was a prayer that Rav would say. And in that prayer, we say, it should be Hashem's will that he should give us, v'siten lanu, we have a whole list of things, and we say, Chayim sheish b'am yiras shamayim v'yiras chet. He should give us life that has fear of heaven and fear of sin. Chayim shein b'hem busha uchlima. Chayim, life that doesn't have embarrassment and humiliation. Chayim shel osher v'chavod, a life of wealth and honor. Chayim shtei b'anu avas Torah v'yiras shamayim, and a life that has love of Torah and fear of heaven. And then we go on. And if you pay close attention, there seems to be a redundancy here, because we said, you should give us life that has fear of heaven and fear of sin, and a life that has love of Torah and fear of heaven. We already asked for life of fear of heaven. We seem to ask for fear of heaven twice in this tefillah, in this prayer. So one suggestion I heard from and saw from Rabbi Leib Gurwitz is that there's different types of fear of heaven. There's the initial fear of heaven, and then after we have a love of Torah, we can have an even greater level of fear of heaven. So we ask for it again, because the fear of heaven the Yiras Shamayim that we can develop once we've studied Torah is on a different level. Another suggestion I saw was that the first time we just ask for fear of heaven, Yiras Shamayim. The second time we say Shetehei Banu, it should be within us. So first we just ask for it, and then we ask that we should internalize it more. But Rav Schwab says that we ask for fear of heaven, but then, maybe because that's a priority, but then we ask for Osher v'Chavod, we ask for wealth and honor. And why we ask for wealth and honor Okay, that's its own question. But we ask for wealth and honor. Well, once we ask for wealth and honor, and we imagine that we receive it, then we have to ask for fear of heaven again. Because, like we said, the king, when he gets his wealth and honor, even if though, of course, previously he had been somebody who had who had fear of heaven, but as soon as he is appointed to this position, um, he gets his wealth and honor, then the fear of heaven can easily fall by the wayside. And so after we ask for our osher v'chavod, we ask for our wealth and honor, we once again have to ask for our for Yiras Shamayim, for fear of heaven. So the king is at risk as soon as he's appointed of forgetting all that he knows, forgetting his fear of heaven, forgetting his observances, and so he's to write a Torah right at the very beginning to remind him of his duty and to remind him to fear God and to keep the Torah. And finally, it says, and in order that he not grow haughty, grow arrogant over his brothers. And that could be simply understood to mean how does having a Torah with him keep him from becoming arrogant? So, because there's lessons of humility in the Torah, lessons of humility throughout the Torah. But another idea which I shared last night, actually, some of you were there, as that is from the Ksav Sofer. And the Ksav Sofer says that the way that having the Torah with him and studying the Torah will prevent him from becoming from becoming arrogant is because the Torah itself, when we experience Torah study, we are humbled. Not necessarily the specific lessons in the Torah that relate to humility, but Torah study itself can humble a person. And that's because as we learn Torah, we experience the vastness of the wisdom of God that can humble us. The Nefesh HaChaim, Rav Chaim Volozhinger gave, I couldn't find where it is, but I recall a mashal, a parable of a person who goes to visit the king, and the king brings him into the treasure room, and the treasure room is full of silver, and he's amazed by all the silver. Wow, what treasures are here? And then he notices that there's a door in the back of the treasure room, and he says, "What's through that door?" And the king says, "Oh, come with me." And he opens the door, and there's another even bigger room, and it's full of gold, beautiful gold items, gold jewels, gold not jewels, but gold coins and everything. And then he notices that there's another door in the back, and he says, "What's through that door?" And he brings him, and he opens the door, and there's a room full of diamonds, shiny diamonds, a huge room. And the idea is that that's what happens when we learn Torah. That at the beginning, we begin to study, we discover tremendous treasures, silver, beautiful ideas, divine wisdom, and it's incredible. But as we learn a little bit more, we realize that if you go a little bit deeper, there's a whole nother vast treasure room that we could experience, layer upon layer, and we all of a sudden we find ourselves in another treasure room of gold. And when we get there and we've deepened our understanding, we then realize that there's even more. There's a whole nother layer to peel back. There's a room full of diamonds. And this experience should humble us. Although we're gathering more knowledge, we're becoming, we might say we should become more arrogant. Oh, I know so much now, but it's the opposite. Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon writes, Marti achakmena, I said I would become wise, but it's distant from me. Meaning the more wise a person becomes, the more they realize how distant it is, how vast and how much there is to understand. And so Torah study itself, not just the lessons within the Torah of humility, but the experience of Torah study itself can humble a person. And that's, says the Ksav Sofer, is why the king is to bring the Torah with him, to prevent him from becoming arrogant, is because the very experience of Torah study and carrying with him the wisdom, the divine wisdom of God, is a reminder that he is a human king. There's a much greater power that that's much more wise and shares with us his tremendous wisdom, and that will keep a king humble. And as the Ramban says about this verse, that the lesson is not just for kings. If a king who is a king is reminded to be humble, then this is a lesson for every person, that to remain humble, an instruction really to remain humble. And one way that we do that is through the incredible experience of Torah study, experiencing the tremendous wisdom of God, and reminding us of what our place is. Okay, stop.
Thank you, Rabbi.